Now, it won't have escaped your attention that a certain Alan Johnson is not with us tonight. Apparently he's busy, but he did call Michael just before he went on air tonight. Something about advice on installing banks of telephone lines in Westminster. It's a telecoms logistic on which Michael is something of an expert. But a source close to Alan, actually that would be Alan, described claims that he's poised to challenge for the leadership as, quote, total bollocks. So it looks like Labour will be fighting the next election with Ed Miliband in charge after all. But what does he have, and does he have what it takes to be Prime Minister? We turn to a man who knows him well, his biographer, political director of the Huffington Post, Mehdi Hasan. This is Take of the Week.
Weird Ed. Wallace and Gromit Ed. Red Ed. Son of the man who hated Britain Ed. According to his army of critics, the Labour leader is still too weird and too weak to be Prime Minister. Apparently the key qualification for being PM these days is whether or not you can eat a bacon sandwich. Ugh. I guess that rules me out. But guess who else was knocked for being a bit weird and having an odd voice? Yeah, Margaret Thatcher in the 70s. I wonder what happened to her. As for weak, Miliband's not only united his party, he's also had a massive impact as leader of the opposition, having taken on the banks, the energy companies, the rail operators, even the trade unions. Oh, and he's also the first politician ever to take on both Rupert Murdoch and the Daily Mail. You don't have to agree with all his policies or like the sound of his voice, but let's not pretend he doesn't have what it takes to do the job. Yeah, he doesn't have Cameron's swagger or Blair's charisma, but do we really want more testosterone-fueled alpha males running the country? If Miliband walks through the door of number 10 next year, and he's still the bookies' favourite, he'll have more high-level government experience under his belt than Blair and Cameron combined. Remember, as Cabinet Minister for Climate Change, he almost single-handedly saved the UN's big summit in Copenhagen in 2009. You know, George W. Bush once said about his critics that they misunderestimated him. The Miliband bashers are in danger of making the same mistake.
And from Ed's Easy Diner in Euston Station to our own Easy Diner here in New Broadcasting House in W1. Mehdi joins us now. Now, Mehdi, you outlined or you set out Ed's strengths. So why don't more voters see them? Indeed, the more they see of him, the worse his personal ratings get.
I'm not sure that's true. I think, well, why don't they like him? I've laid out his strengths.
It is true, actually. In terms of the personal rating, that's worse than 3 years ago. Fit to be Prime Minister, worse than 3 years ago. Yeah,
but that's over a time period. In terms of seeing him, I mean, one of the problems Alistair Campbell outlined back in the first year of the coalition was Labour have a particularly different period in this parliament because they're the least interesting of the three parties. They're always trying to get heard. It's always more interesting to talk about Cameron.
So why don't the voters see his strengths?
I think because his weaknesses get in the way, Andrew. He has some serious weaknesses. He has image problems. He's not very good on television. He said it himself in a speech in July. I'm not the guy from Central Casting. There are people with more square jaws than me, people with more chiselled features than me, and he knows it. And he hasn't done enough to change it, to be honest.
But you still think the strengths are stronger than the weaknesses?
I still think, in electoral terms, yes, I think that's true. I don't think we have the presidential political system yet that some members of the media think we do. I don't think when people go to the polls next May, they're going to cast their ballots based on bacon sandwiches or forgotten conference speeches or weirdly typed tweets about blackbusters or whatever other...
What about just they don't see him as fit to be Prime Minister? I mean, that was Neil Kinnock's problem in 92.
Partly Neil Kinnock's problem.
They did vote a lot of the way on
Not necessarily true. A lot of political scientists disagree with that view on Neil Kinnock. I think that was clearly a factor, the Kinnock factor, and there's this whole concept of the blink test, you know, can you close your eyes and see him on the... And it's a problem. Yeah. I mentioned some friends of mine I was coming on the show tonight, talk about whether Ed Miliband's going to be Prime Minister. He said, why are you wasting time with that? He's not going to be. And those are, you know, apolitical people. There's no doubt that people have a real image issue with him.
Is there an Ed Miliband problem?
I don't think it's an issue that'll stop us winning in May 2015. Don't look at me like that. You know perfectly well that in the run-up to the 1979 election, Callaghan always scored higher than Mrs. Thatcher as a potential leader.
That's fine, but I enjoy the history lesson. But is there an Ed Miliband problem?
No, we are going to win in May 2015.
Yeah, but are you going to win despite Ed Miliband or because of him?
We will win as a collective organisation.
That's not answering the question, which is what you're paid to do by being here, you know. So I'll try one more time. Is there an Ed Miliband problem?
No, we are going to win in 2015.
No, you've already said that.
He has a problem. His problem was that all the people that supported David Miliband for the leadership, which included people like the Daily Mirror and the rest of it, were very bad losers, and they continue to slag him off behind the scenes.
Do the Ed bashers, as Mehdi calls them, do they underestimate him?
No, I don't think they do. I thought maybe doth protest too much. I mean, what's happening at the moment is that the people around Ed seem to have decided that they've chosen the wrong person. I mean, when we see speculation about leadership challenges at this stage, as we're just running up to the general election, when we see that the last faith drained out of him because of his conference speech, when Mehdi comes here and reminds us about a bacon sandwich, which, by the way, was months ago, you don't need to go back to
the conference speech was awful, Michael, but that's the point is people don't vote in elections based on conference.
No, but the Labour Party, most of the Labour Party seems to have decided they've got the wrong person, but they're not going to replace him. I mean, this is a perfect storm for the Conservatives. I don't know whether it is enough for the Conservatives to win, but I now think that my general judgment that the Labour Party will win, will be the largest party, may even have an overall majority, that judgment is now clouded by this kind of joker that's being played. The joker is the Miliband factor. It is a very strong...
Let me get in, Mehdi, then I'll come back to you.
Well, just to answer the question you asked Diane, in spite of, let's be very clear. One achievement which even his critics have to recognise is the Labour Party is actually, despite all the briefings, and those aren't people around him who are calling for Alan Johnson, clearly, it's a very united Labour Party. We should have been in a civil war now.
Show together.
Compared to the Tories in the late 90s, Labour in the early 80s, given the fact that he beat his brother in a very fratricidal contest, it's actually a remarkably united party. He's even got Blairites like Andrew Adonis, Charlie Faulkner, Caroline Flint coming out defending him.
I understand that, and I think that's
And on the
true.
Michael point specifically about, protesting too much, etc. I mean, look, the fact is this. Looking at the polls, Labour still leading the polls despite the kind of blips. You talk about hung parliament.
Yeah,
he actually didn't do that much to win.
Is it in a good enough position with 7 months to go?
No, clearly not.
Do you agree?
He should have been much more radical. He's been too cautious.
Well, that's a different question.
But is he in a good enough position?
That's why
He's in a good enough position, not least because his party is having a nervous breakdown over UKIP. And the people complaining about... It's not that anyone's changed their mind. The people complaining about Ed Miliband...
His party overtook Labour in 2 polls in the last week. Now, Labour has gone back again. And the lead is only 2 points. My question is a 2-point lead enough 7 months from an election when there is always a swing back to the sitting government?
With the Tories on the trajectory they are, yes. And no one has changed their mind about Ed Miliband. The people that don't like him never liked him.
Mehdi has made a very good point, which is that if Labour get the same vote as the Conservatives, Labour will win actually quite handsomely.
Yeah, they get an overall majority.
So the question is the Miliband factor so strong that not only will Labour not overtake the Conservatives in the number of votes that it gets, but that the Conservatives will get 4 or 5 percentage points more than Labour in order to win the election.
No, Michael, this is absurd.
No, I'm saying...
This is not a presidential system.
No, I'm saying that is the question.
But hold on,
whether they can get 5% more. And I'm saying that's quite improbable.
OK, 2 questions, Mehdi, because it's interesting. You say it's not a presidential system. I can assure you, and you will know this as well, the Tories will fight a presidential election. There's a simple... Labour is more popular than Mr Miliband, and Mr Cameron is more popular than the Tories. This will be a presidential campaign.
We can test that. They did it in 2010. They ran a presidential campaign against the most unpopular Prime Minister in living memory, and they couldn't pull off a majority. In fact, the debates were widely considered to be a mistake.
But they formed the government.
David Cameron's decision to do debates backfired on him.
There'll be no I agree with Nick this time.
No, in fact, it'll be much easier for Ed Miliband to do a debate against 2 guys who play tennis together.
Very much hope.
And Nick Clegg won't be able to play the insurgent card, and Miliband gives. And just very quickly on the protest too much, I mean, let's be very clear about this guy. He has led a political agenda. He has actually, as a leader of the opposition, had massive influence on the political agenda. You had David Cameron talk about 0 hours contracts last week. NHS, where does this all come from? The Lib Dems are talking about the minimum wage. It's Ed Miliband who set the cost of living agenda, coined the squeeze middle phrase, etc.
And indeed, we're not bombing Syria.
Indeed.
Do people see him as weird?
No.
They don't?
No.
Oh, they do. They do. Let's be very clear. I, as an admirer, can say they do.
Why, when he meets people on Hampstead Heath, why do they all speak in Milibandese? Why did they never raise issues of immigration or welfare?
I didn't write that particular speech, so I
well
can't.
aware of it.
I can't account for what people are supposed to have said. The truth is that when people meet Ed, they actually gain a very favourable impression.
Do you?
Oh, I mean, that is...
They used to say.
true, man.
preposterous.
They used to say that
They used to say that about Ted Heath as well.
All parties say that about all
Okay,
their
let me
leaders.
rephrase Diane's point. Actually, forget the meeting him, because he can't meet 60 million people between now and May. So that's a problem, even if that were true. But I do think the moments where he's actually, quote-unquote, been true to himself and actually not been cautious, the moments where he went after Rebecca Brooks and Rupert Murdoch on hacking, the moments where he decided to stand up to the Daily Mail, the moments where he gave an energy price-free speech, which people in his own party didn't want him to do.
Well,
his poll ratings went up, Andrew.
No, I understand, and these
So
are all
actually,
very
why doesn't he
good
do
points.
more of
Let me give you another moment, though, and that was Scottish Labour being in despair during the referendum campaign because of his lack of cut-through, even in the Labour heartlands. On that campaign, he just looked out of place.
I think all the British leaders looked at our place in that campaign. I mean, look, the campaign was
but
atrocious.
this
I've written
is a
about how
the Tories
atrocious the
don't have
Labour
it.
role in
The
it.
Tories don't have any
Agreed.
heartlands
The,
in Scotland.
the Labour performance in that campaign was atrocious. I've written about it. They should learn some lessons from it for the next year. Gordon Brown had to come and save the day with Mark
No,
Carthy.
the heartlands is a huge issue. It's a huge issue, firstly in Scotland, where Labour may well lose many seats to the Nationalists, but it could even be an issue elsewhere, and we'll be very interested to see the Haywood by-election result today to see how close UKIP get to
True,
Labour.
but it'll also be interesting to see a Clacton by-election. I mean, we're talking about divided Labour Party. It's the Tory party who's about to lose
Well, the right is
tonight.
divided, which
It's
is a
the
new
Tory party
phenomenon
who's
in
about to lose.
British politics. Because
And Ashcroft's polls show Labour doing pretty well in the marginals.
Though that was
interestingly.
taken a little while ago, but you're quite right. Tories are under pressure tonight. Can I ask you this, though? Is he right, Mr Miliband, to fight a 35% strategy?
I'm not sure if he is
I
fighting
don't
a
think he is
35 or
doing
40 or...
35% strategy,
I mean,
no.
he would obviously
why do
dispute
so
that.
many people in Labour
Because
think
they're his
that's the case?
enemies saying that. I mean, if
Well,
he
you're
wa-
not saying it.
No, I don't
I
think
thought
he's
you were
fighting.
filed under E for enemy.
No. You'll
you under
find.
F- are you under
You'll
F for
find
friend?
I'm one of the few people that's not briefing
Okay.
anonymously
are you in
against
favour of the
Ed.
mention tax?
Sorry? In favour of the... In principle, but I think it's a very delicate thing because it's actually largely a tax on London.
That's a
And a future Labour mayoral candidate can't offer
that's a
such a
roundabout way of
tax.
saying no. Mehdi, thanks for being with us.
No worries.
Now it's late.